The saloon doors groaned open as the late afternoon sun spilled across the wooden floorboards, setting the dust swirling like gold. Every poker game, every whiskey glass, every laugh went dead silent the moment Evelyn Hart stepped inside. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough to make men straighten their spines and shift uncomfortably on their stools. She wore a faded lavender dress that brushed against her boots, its lace edges frayed from years of wear. A straw hat shaded her face, but when she lifted it slightly, the room caught its breath. Evelyn was 30 years old, but time seemed to bow before her. Her beauty was not the delicate kind that fluttered and vanished. It was the kind that lingered, that carried stories in the curve of her lips and storms behind her blue-gray eyes. Yet despite that beauty, there was an invisible wall around her, a silence that even the boldest cowboys dared not cross. "Afternoon, Miss Hart," muttered the bartender, pretending to polish a glass he'd cleaned 3 times already. "Whiskey," she said softly, sliding a silver coin across the counter. A hush hung over the room like smoke. Men who could tame wild horses and shoot a rattlesnake from 50 yards away looked at her as if she carried death in her shadow. And maybe, in some way, she did. When she turned to leave, the saloon doors swung shut behind her with a sigh, and conversation resumed nervous. Hushed, trembling. "She ain't right." "That one," said Deputy Miles, spitting into a bucket. "Prettiest woman this side o' the Rockies, yet no man'll marry her." "You ever wonder why?" "Because they don't live long enough," another man muttered. "Ask Henry Slade, he tried courting her once." "Can't," someone said. "He's buried by the cottonwoods." Laughter broke out, forced and uneasy. The sound followed Evelyn down Main Street, where the wind kicked up dry leaves and the smell of horse sweat clung to the air, out past the blacksmith's forge and the church steeple. Beyond, where the dirt road gave way to rolling prairie, stood Evelyn's farmhouse, a lonely white shape against the vastness of the Montana plains. Its paint peeled like old paper, the shutters creaked, and no birds ever landed on its fence. Even the hound dogs avoided it, crossing to the other side of the road when they passed. But at dusk, when the sky burned crimson and gold, a single lamp would flicker in her window, casting her silhouette against the curtains, a solitary figure who never smiled, never wept, just waited. No one knew what she waited for. They only knew that 5 years ago, she had been engaged to marry Thomas Vane, a cattle trader's son. The entire town remembered the day before the wedding, the music, the laughter, the way Thomas had ridden down Main Street in his best coat, a bouquet of prairie roses in hand by morning. He was gone. They found his horse near the river, reins torn, saddle empty. They found his hat half buried in the mud. And by sunset, they found something else, a ribbon from Evelyn's hair, torn and soaked in blood. The sheriff searched for weeks, but no body was ever found. The river had taken him, or something else had. From that day forward, Evelyn's house grew quiet. She stopped attending church, stopped visiting the market except at dusk, and stopped smiling entirely. The few men who tried to court her afterward met strange fate's illness, accidents, or simply vanished without a trace. Some said she was cursed. Others whispered that she'd made a pact with the spirit river, the same one where the Apache once performed burial rites before the white men took their land. Old Mrs. Crowley swore she saw Evelyn talking to shadows one night, her hands covered in dirt as if she'd been digging graves. Yet no law could touch her. No proof ever surfaced. Only stories. And stories were enough to keep every suitor far, far away. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mesa and painted the sky with fire, Evelyn stood on her porch, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. A storm was brewing in the distance. She could feel it in her bones. The wind carried the smell of rain, sagebrush, and something else. Something foreign. Hoofbeats echoed down the empty road. She turned her head. From beyond the ridge rode a lone figure, tall, bare-chested, with black hair trailing like a banner in the wind. His skin glistened bronze beneath the fading sun, and a necklace of carved bone rested on his chest. He rode a dark horse that moved like shadow and thunder combined. As he approached, she felt a strange pulse deep inside her chest, a rhythm that didn't belong to her. The rider stopped at her gate. His gaze locked with hers. His eyes, dark, fierce, ancient, widened as if he'd seen a ghost. "Evelyn Hart," he said in a low, accented voice that rolled like distant thunder. "You should not be alive." The wind went still. Even the crickets silenced. Evelyn's heart pounded once, twice, and then stopped. In that moment, something unseen shifted in the air around them, something that had been waiting, buried deep beneath Dustfall Town for far too long. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. The words hung in the air like smoke. "You should not be alive." The Apache warrior sat unmoving on his horse, his gaze burning through the twilight. Rain clouds rolled low and heavy across the sky, and for a moment it felt as if the world itself held its breath. "I beg your pardon?" she managed to whisper. The man dismounted slowly. He was tall, towering, really with the kind of presence that made the earth seem to steady beneath his boots. His hair was long and black as riverstone, braided loosely at the sides, and around his neck hung a cord of animal teeth and carved turquoise. Scars traced the lines of his shoulders and chest, old, white, and silent witnesses to violence. He took a step closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "You look the same," he said in a low, rough accent. "Same eyes, same mouth, same hands." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the edge of her shawl. "Sir, I think you're mistaken." The man didn't blink. "I do not mistake the face of the dead." Lightning cracked in the distance, splitting the sky. Evelyn stumbled backward, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it echo in her ears. "You're frightening me," she said, though her voice trembled more from confusion than fear. "Who are you?" "I am Taza," he said simply, his voice as deep as thunder rolling over the plains. "Son of Nanton, brother to the river. Why are you here?" she asked, clutching the porch rail. His expression didn't change, but his tone softened. "To see if the stories were true." "What stories?" "That a woman with the eyes of my people's curse still walks the white man's land." A cold shiver crawled up her spine. "You're talking nonsense." He stepped onto her porch, the boards creaking beneath his boots. Rain began to fall, slow, heavy drops that pattered against the dry earth. He looked around her house, his gaze catching on the half-shuttered windows, the withered flowers by the steps, and the way she stood alone, as if surrounded by ghosts. "I have seen you before," he said. "In the fire. In my dreams. You wore a white dress then. You cried by the river." Evelyn's breath hitched. She wanted to deny it, to laugh it off as superstition, but she couldn't, because she had dreamed of the river before. She'd seen flashes of faces she didn't know, and sometimes she woke up with sand on her hands and the smell of smoke in her hair. "How do you know me?" she asked finally. Taza looked past her, toward the horizon where the river wound through the valley like a scar. "Because my brother died for you." The words struck her like a blow. "Your brother? He went into the water to save you. But you did not come out. The elders said your spirit crossed into another skin." She shook her head. "That's impossible." Taza's jaw clenched. "You think so? Then why does the river call your name each night?" The wind rose, sending the shutters slamming against the house. Evelyn turned toward the sound instinctively and froze. On the far ridge, flashes of blue-white lightning lit up the valley, and for an instant she thought she saw figures standing along the water's edge. Dozens of them still, waiting. She blinked. They were gone. When she turned back, Taza was watching her carefully, as though studying a wounded animal. "You feel it too," he said softly. No. Her voice shook. I feel nothing. Lies, he whispered. For a moment neither spoke. The rain thickened, drumming against the porch roof. Evelyn's mind raced. Who was this man? How could he know things she had never told anyone? Finally, she found her voice again. You should leave, she said, though the words came out weaker than she intended. The sheriff doesn't take kindly to strangers, especially not Apaches. I am not afraid of your sheriff, Taza said, but he should be afraid of what walks with you. He turned then, mounting his horse in one fluid motion. As he pulled the reins, his eyes softened, not with threat, but with something like sorrow. Tomorrow, he said, I will return. There are truths buried under your floor. Evelyn Hart, you just don't remember burying them. And before she could answer, he rode off into the storm, lightning carving his silhouette against the sky like a specter from another time. Evelyn stood there long after he vanished into the rain. Her shawl clung to her shoulders, heavy with water, but she didn't move, because deep inside, beneath the fear and confusion, a memory stirred one she didn't recognize but couldn't deny. A man's voice whispering her name. The smell of smoke, the feeling of sinking into dark water. When the thunder finally faded, Evelyn whispered into the wind, Who am I, really? But only the sound of the river answered low, endless, and full of secrets. The storm lasted all night. The next morning, the town of Dustfall glistened under a pale gray sky, the streets soaked, the air heavy with the smell of wet soil and sage. But Evelyn Hart barely noticed the dawn. She hadn't slept at all. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Taza's face, his dark eyes, the rain running down his chest, the way he'd said her name like it carried centuries behind it. There are truths buried under your floor. Evelyn Hart. The words echoed in her skull like a drum. She rose before sunrise, lit the oil lamp, and looked around her parlor. The house felt different now, colder, heavier, as if it were holding its breath. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath her bare feet. The sound seemed sharper this morning, like the house itself was whispering. She poured herself a cup of black coffee, but her hands shook so badly she spilled most of it. Finally, she gave up pretending to be calm. She grabbed the poker from beside the hearth and began tapping the floorboards. One by one, thud, hollow. Her heart stopped. She knelt, pried at the seam with the poker until one board came loose with a splintering crack. A rush of stale, cold air escaped from beneath. She held the lamp closer and froze. There, wrapped in an old, rotting cloth, lay a bracelet carved from dark wood and inlaid with turquoise and bone. The design was unlike anything she'd ever seen, shaped like a raven with outstretched wings. Her breath trembled. She reached for it, and the moment her fingers brushed the wood, a sudden pulse of heat shot up her arm. The air thickened. For a heartbeat, she wasn't in her parlor anymore. She was somewhere else. She saw water, rushing dark and red through a canyon. She heard men shouting in a language she didn't know. And through the chaos, a hand reached toward her, a strong hand, scarred, painted with tribal marks. She reached back, then she was on her knees again, gasping, the bracelet clutched in her fist. Her door creaked open. Evelyn jumped, heart hammering. But it wasn't the sheriff or a neighbor, it was Taza. He stood in the doorway, his dark hair damp from mist, his bare chest streaked with dust and rain. Around his neck, he still wore that same turquoise necklace, though now she noticed something she hadn't before. One of its charms was missing. His eyes went immediately to the bracelet in her hand. He froze. Where did you find that? Under the floor, she whispered. You said something was buried. You were right. Taza stepped closer, his boots silent on the wet wood. That belonged to my brother. Evelyn's throat went dry. Your brother? He nodded slowly. His name was Kohana. He wore that bracelet the night he went into the river. The river, she repeated softly, her pulse quickening. Taza looked around the room as if seeing through the walls. He followed a woman there. A white woman. She was a teacher at the fort near our lands. She saved children from soldiers who wanted to drive them out. My brother loved her. His voice cracked slightly, though he tried to hide it. But she disappeared that same night. The elders said the river claimed both their spirits. The next day it bled red. Evelyn stared at the bracelet in her trembling hands. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Taza said quietly, "you wear her face." She shook her head violently. "That's impossible. I've never been near any fort. I was born here. Were you?" He interrupted, eyes sharp as flint. "Can you remember your first home? Your mother's name?" Her mouth opened, but no words came. She realized with a sinking dread that her earliest memories were foggy. She could recall her teenage years, her father's ranch, the day Thomas proposed, but before that, everything blurred. Taza knelt before her, his expression unreadable. "You have her soul. Kahana died to protect you. When he drowned, his spirit did not return to the tribe. The elders said the river trapped him, waiting for her to remember." Evelyn dropped the bracelet, backing away until her shoulders hit the wall. "Stop it. Stop talking like that." Taza picked up the bracelet gently, as if it were sacred. "You touched it, didn't you? You saw the water. You felt the call." She didn't answer. Tears stung her eyes. He placed the bracelet on the table between them. "You are not cursed, Evelyn Hart. You are unfinished." Thunder rumbled in the distance again, though the sky outside was clear-eyed and for the briefest instant. She swore she heard something whisper through the house, a man's voice. Faint, soft, calling her name from beneath the floorboards. The thunder had quieted by morning, but the echoes of last night still trembled in Elara's heart. She had barely slept, her mind tangled with images of the Apache warrior who had stood outside her cabin, silent, unyielding, and hauntingly human. His name, Cale, still echoed in her thoughts like a whispered promise and a warning. When the first rays of dawn slipped through the cracks in the shutters, Elara forced herself up. Her small cabin smelled of damp wood and smoke. The bread she'd left on the table had gone stale, and her hands trembled slightly as she tried to light the fire. The storm might have passed, but another one was building within her, a storm she didn't understand. Outside, the desert was glistening under the pale morning sun. Drops of rain hung on cactus thorns like tiny crystals. She stepped onto the porch and froze. Cale was still there. He stood a few yards away, his broad back to her, the morning light caressing his bronze skin. His long black hair, damp and loose, reached past his shoulders. Beads and small bones were woven into his tribal jewelry, glinting faintly. Around his neck hung a single feather, black-tipped and old, perhaps the symbol of his people, perhaps something more personal. Elara swallowed hard. "You shouldn't be here," she called out, her voice wavering between fear and curiosity. Cale turned slowly. His eyes, dark as midnight, yet filled with a strange calm, locked onto hers. For a long moment neither spoke. The wind brushed between them like an invisible thread. Finally, he said, his voice low and rough from disuse, "You are the one who gave me water that night." She blinked. "What?" He took a step forward. 3 days ago, by the creek. You did not see my face. I was wounded. You left water for a dying man." Elara's breath caught in her throat. She remembered that moment, the dark shape collapsed by the rocks, the blood-stained bandages, and her own fear of getting too close. She had left her canteen and hurried away before sunrise, praying the man would live. "You were him?" She whispered. Cale nodded. "I lived because of you." Her chest tightened. "Then why did you come here? To thank me?" Cale's gaze flickered to the horizon, where the mountains bled gold under the morning sun. "To warn you," he said, There are men coming, soldiers. They followed me from the north. They saw the water you left. They think you helped an Apache escape." Elara's stomach twisted. "That's not true." "They will not care," Cale said grimly. "They will come for you. Burn this place. Take what they want." Her hands gripped the railing of the porch. "Why are you telling me this?" Cale looked back at her then, and in his eyes she saw something deeper than duty or gratitude. It was sorrow. "Because I owe you a life," he said simply, "and I will not let them take yours." For a long, trembling moment, Elara couldn't speak. She had spent months trying to be invisible, building a life far from anyone's notice. Now, because of one act of kindness, her safety was slipping away. "What should I do?" she asked quietly. Cale stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Pack only what you need. At sundown I will return. We leave before nightfall." Her eyes widened. "Leave? With you?" He didn't answer. The warrior's expression softened for the first time, something almost human breaking through his stoic calm. "If you stay, you die," he said. Then he turned and disappeared into the desert. Moving like shadow and sunlight woven together, Elara stood frozen, heart racing, watching until his silhouette vanished among the sagebrush. The rest of the day passed in uneasy silence. She tried to keep busy, packing food, wrapping her mother's old shawl, whispering prayers she had long forgotten. Every time the wind rustled the door, she thought it was the soldiers. Every time she saw movement in the distance, she hoped it was Cale Dot by the time the sun began to sink, painting the desert in blood-red hues. She had made her choice. When Cale appeared again at the edge of the horizon, strong, silent, his body bathed in the glow of dying light, Elara stepped out from her cabin, a small bundle in her hands. "I'm ready," she said. Cale nodded once, and for a fleeting moment, the faintest hint of respect crossed his face. Then together, they walked into the coming darkness, two souls bound by fate, one storm ending as another began. The desert swallowed the last light as Cale and Elara rode into the open plains. The sun had bled into the horizon, leaving streaks of crimson behind, like the fading memory of a wound. The night air was sharp, dry, and heavy with the scent of sage. A storm had rolled through the land the night before, but now only the quiet hum of crickets filled the air. Elara clung to the reins, her knuckles white. Her heart beat so fast she could feel it echo in her throat. The old mare beneath her stumbled occasionally over the uneven ground, and each time, Cale turned his head slightly to check if she was still following. "Keep close," he said softly, his voice blending with the wind. "They'll move faster than you think." Elara swallowed hard. "The soldiers?" Cale nodded. "They have horses and anger. A dangerous mix." The words sent a shiver down her spine. For a long time, neither spoke. The desert stretched endlessly, its emptiness both beautiful and terrifying. The moon climbed higher, silvering Cale's bare shoulders and casting ghostly light on his tribal jewelry. He moved like a shadow carved from the earth, sure, quiet, commanding. Elara watched him, unable to tear her eyes away. He carried no lantern, no map, yet he seemed to know every rock, every ridge, every whisper of the land. There was something sacred in the way he rode, like he was part of the desert itself. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, breaking the silence. "There's a canyon ahead," Cale replied. "My people once hid there when the soldiers burned our villages. They will not find us easily." "Your people?" she repeated softly. "Are they still alive?" Cale didn't answer at first. His jaw tightened, and his gaze drifted toward the dark mountains. "Some," he said finally. "Enough to remember. Enough to mourn." The sadness in his voice cut through her chest. She wanted to ask more about his tribe, his past, the reason he carried such weight in his eyes, but something in his silence warned her to stop. Hours passed. The air grew colder, the stars burning brighter above them. Then, faintly at first, a sound broke through the quiet, the rhythmic thunder of hooves. Cale tensed immediately. They've found us. Elara turned, her breath catching. Far behind them, small dots of light flickered, lanterns swinging from the hands of men who were drawing closer by the second. What do we do? She whispered. Cale's hand tightened around his reins. We ride. He spurred his horse forward, and the desert erupted into motion. The pounding of hooves filled the night, scattering dust and fear into the air. Elara leaned low against her horse, clinging to the saddle as the cold wind whipped her face. Shots cracked in the distance, sharp, echoing bursts that made her flinch. Bullets whistled through the dark, one striking a cactus to her right, sending shards flying. Cale! She cried out. Keep your head down. He shouted back. His voice was steady, commanding, and it gave her courage she didn't know she still had. The ground sloped downward. Suddenly, the mouth of the canyon opening like a dark wound in the desert. Cale led them through a narrow pass between jagged rocks, his horse sure-footed even on the loose gravel. Behind them, the soldiers' shouts grew fainter as the path twisted and narrowed. By the time they reached the heart of the canyon, silence had returned. Only the echo of their horses' labored breathing filled the air. Cale dismounted first, his chest rising and falling under the moonlight. We'll rest here, he said, scanning the cliffs. They won't risk following us into sacred land. Elara slid from her saddle, her legs trembling. She looked around. The canyon walls rose high and steep, painted silver by the moon. A small pool glimmered nearby, fed by a trickle of spring water. She knelt and cupped the water in her hands, drinking deeply. Then, turning, she saw Cale watching her, not with suspicion, but something gentler. You saved me once, he said quietly. Now I return it. Elara's heart stuttered. She wanted to thank him, to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The night between them felt charged, alive, as if every unspoken thought hung in the air like sparks waiting to ignite. Cale turned away, kneeling to inspect his horse's injured leg. The moonlight traced the scars across his back, some old, some new, each one telling a story she could only imagine. As the wind whispered through the canyon, Elara realized something she had never dared admit before. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was afraid of losing him, and somewhere beyond the cliffs, the soldiers regrouped under the dark sky, vowing not to give up. The chase was far from over. The canyon slept beneath the cold moon, wrapped in silence and shadow. Elara sat by the small fire Cale had built, her knees drawn to her chest, the flickering light painting soft gold across her face. The wind whispered faintly through the cliffs, carrying a chill that smelled of rain and stone. Cale crouched near the horses, tending to his wounds in silence. His bare back gleamed in the firelight, a canvas of scars that spoke of battles, loss, and survival. Elara watched him from the corner of her eye, unable to look away. He had risked his life for her, again, and yet she barely knew who he was. You don't have to stay awake, Cale said without turning. His deep, calm voice broke the quiet like a soft crack in ice. I'll keep watch. Elara hugged her shawl tighter. I couldn't sleep if I tried. He looked over his shoulder, his dark eyes glinting in the fire's glow. Fear keeps you alive, he said, but it also keeps you from living. The words lingered in the air between them. She wanted to ask what he meant, but before she could, a sudden gust of wind made the fire flicker wildly. Sparks danced up into the night sky, vanishing like brief stars. Cale, she said softly, her voice trembling. You said this is sacred land. What did you mean? Cale turned back to the fire, his expression unreadable. My people once called this canyon home, he said quietly. Before the soldiers came. Before the fire? His gaze drifted upward to the high cliffs, where the moonlight kissed ancient carvings etched into the rock, symbols of birds, rivers, and flames. My mother was born here, he continued. She used to say the wind carried our ancestors' voices, that they still guard this place, watching, waiting for what was lost. Elara's chest tightened. And what was lost? Cale's jaw clenched. Everything. For a long time, neither spoke. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows across the canyon walls. Finally, Cale reached into a leather pouch by his side and pulled out something small. A worn feather, black-tipped and aged. She gave me this before she died, he said, his voice low, almost reverent. She said it would remind me who I am when the world tried to make me forget. Elara's eyes softened. It's beautiful, she whispered. Cale looked at her then, really looked, and for a heartbeat. The distance between them seemed to vanish. The air grew still, thick with something unspoken. You shouldn't be part of this, he said finally, turning away. You helped a dying man. You didn't choose this fight. Elara shook her head. Maybe not. But it found me anyway. She took a slow breath, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. If I had to do it again, I'd still give you that water. Cale's eyes flickered, surprise. Then something deeper. Respect, gratitude, maybe, even something close to pain. He stood and walked toward the edge of the canyon, where the firelight faded into darkness. They won't stop, he murmured. The soldiers. Once they've marked someone as guilty, mercy no longer exists. Then what do we do? Elara asked, rising to her feet. Cale glanced at her over his shoulder. We don't hide. We survive. Before she could answer, a sudden noise shattered the quiet, the sharp clatter of stones tumbling down the slope. Cale reacted instantly, pulling her close and pressing a hand over her mouth. She could feel the heat of his chest against her back, his heartbeat steady even as her own raced. From above, faint voices drifted through the darkness. Lantern light flickered at the rim of the canyon. The soldiers had found them. Cale's hand fell to the knife at his hip. They've moved faster than I thought, he whispered. We must leave before dawn. Elara nodded, trembling. There's nowhere else, is there? There's always somewhere, Cale said, his tone fierce but calm. As long as we keep moving. They doused the fire and packed what little they had. Cale led her through a narrow crevice that wound deeper into the canyon where ancient trees grew between the rocks. The air was colder there, and the path barely wide enough for two Dot as they moved through the shadows. Elara glanced at him, the way the moonlight kissed his face, the way he moved with silent certainty. She realized then that her fear had changed. It wasn't of him, or even of the soldiers, Dot, it was of losing him. And somewhere, high above, the soldiers spread out along the ridge, their torches glowing like hungry stars. The chase wasn't over. It was only becoming more dangerous. But for the first time, Elara didn't feel like a victim. She felt like someone who had finally stepped into her fate, and beside her, the Apache warrior, the man no one dared understand, was ready to face the fire once more. The first light of dawn crept into the canyon like a blade of gold slicing through darkness. The air was cold and still, heavy with the quiet before something terrible. Elara sat beside Cale on a ledge overlooking the narrow path below. The fire was long dead, its ashes gray and lifeless, but her heart burned like the embers that refused to die. Cale had not spoken for hours. His sharp eyes watched the canyon mouth, where faint shadows moved against the rising sun. Soldiers. They were closing in. They found us? Elara whispered. Cale's jaw tightened. We still have time. He rose, his tall, muscular frame catching the dawn's glow. The light traced every scar across his back, every line of strength in his arms. His tribal jewelry glimmered faintly, beads and bones that seemed to carry whispers from another world. He looked down at her. "There's a path through the rocks, hidden. You'll follow it north. Don't stop until you see the cottonwoods by the creek." Elara shook her head. "I'm not leaving you." He met her gaze, his dark eyes calm yet full of something deeper, a quiet sorrow that made her chest ache. "You must. They want me, not you." "No," she said, stepping closer. "They want both of us. Because of what I am." Cale frowned. "What you are?" Elara took a shaky breath. She had carried this secret for years, hidden beneath silence and shame. "You asked why no man wanted to marry me," she began softly. "They say I'm cursed, that every man who loved me died." Cale stared at her, the morning wind lifting his hair. "It began after my father's death," she continued, her voice trembling. "He worked for the army. They said he betrayed them, gave land to your people, your tribe. When he was killed, the town turned on me. They called me the daughter of a traitor, said my blood was tainted." Her eyes filled with tears. "Every man who courted me was warned, and those who ignored the warnings met accidents. One drowned in the river. One was shot by outlaws. Another fell from his horse. After the third, they started saying I carried death like perfume." Cale's face softened. He stepped closer, his voice low, steady. "You are not cursed, Elara. You are feared because they need someone to blame." The words struck deep. For the first time, she didn't feel dirtier or broken. She felt seen, but before she could reply, the sound of hooves echoed down the canyon. The soldiers had arrived. Cale grabbed his bow and knife, eyes narrowing. "Stay behind me." Elara's pulse thundered. The first soldier appeared at the bend, rifle raised. "There!" he shouted. "The savage and the woman, take them both." Gunfire exploded through the canyon. Dust and echoes filled the air. Cale moved like lightning, diving, rolling, striking. His knife flashed silver as he cut through two soldiers before they even fired again. "Cale!" Elara screamed as bullets cracked against the rocks beside her. "Run!" He shouted, "Go!" But she couldn't move. She watched him fight, every motion a blend of fury and grace, his long black hair whipping in the wind, his muscles straining under the dawn's light. He fought not for blood, but for her, for the woman everyone else had abandoned. A shot rang out. Cale staggered, blood blooming across his shoulder. He dropped to one knee, breathing hard. "No!" Elara ran to him, kneeling at his side as the soldiers closed in. Her hands pressed against the wound, tears blurring her vision. Cale gritted his teeth. "Leave me." "I won't," she whispered. "Not again." The soldiers hesitated, their captain raising a hand. "Stand down," he barked. "We need the woman alive. She's the one helping the Apache." Elara turned to face them, fury burning in her chest. "You call helping a dying man a crime? Then arrest me for mercy." The captain sneered. "You don't understand what he is." She stood, trembling but unyielding. "I understand what you are." A hush fell. Even Cale looked up at her in disbelief. There, in the heart of the canyon, Elara, the woman they called cursed, stood like fire made flesh. "Take one more step," she said, her voice shaking with power, "and you'll answer to whatever gods still walk this land." Something in her tone, or maybe the strange energy that rippled through the air, made the men falter. The wind howled through the canyon like an ancient cry. Cale rose slowly, his good arm wrapping protectively around her. "You see?" he said hoarsely to the soldiers. "She's not cursed. She's chosen." The soldiers, unnerved and disoriented, began to retreat. The canyon's echo swallowed their voices until only the wind remained. When silence finally returned, Elara turned to Cale, tears streaking her dirt-stained face. "You could have let me die," she whispered. Cale's hand brushed her cheek gently. "No, you gave me life first." As the sun rose fully, the canyon bloomed in gold and crimson. They stood together, bloodied but alive, two souls no longer haunted by the past, but rewritten by it. And though the world beyond the canyon still waited with judgment and fear, neither of them looked back, because sometimes beauty isn't a blessing. It's a storm that chooses who's brave enough to stand in it.